Welcome to Show Me Sports Legacies, where tonight we finish out our episode Bulldog Strong, 50 Years of Trenton Bulldog Wrestling. We've got Coach Hurst and Coach Bacon. No, we have not kept them sequestered for the past week, but they are in fact here on the program to talk today about wrestling. We also have Daniel Gott and Chris Ockenfels, my friends, joining us with their passion for the sport of wrestling, and we tell some great stories, a lot of great matches, and a lot of great achievements in the program. We also talk about the addition of women's wrestling to the program and what that's going to mean in growth. And we wind up with some perspective on the impact of a life in sports, particularly in wrestling and coaching, that these two men have delivered and lived out themselves as participants and as coaches. Without further ado, we're going to head off into this second episode, and we're talking about the facilities as they were in the early days of the Trenton wrestling program and how that has changed over the years. Talk about the facility in Trenton and what's changed and how that helps support what you're trying to accomplish in the wrestling program.
Okay, I'm gonna chip in here before I know what they're going to say. So when I first got here to Trenton, I can remember Ron rolling mats out in the commons to have practice and thinking, what in the world or what is going on here? Well, every day after school, they would have to get the mats, bring them out, move all the chairs in the commons, roll them out, have practice, roll them back up, put them out. And then it got moved to the rock barn. And then it got moved to the old industrial arts building. And it was just a long time coming for such a good program to finally get the wrestling room. And then I'll let these guys take it from here on that one.
Well, I remember all of those things because I practiced in the commons and morning and night and pushing those cafeteria tables. Oh my gosh. And then and back then the mats were, our practice mats were they're like missiles. And so if you rolled them up wrong, you had to redo it. And that was our warm up kind of, I think, is pushing the tables. And
some of you thought it was.
Yeah, some of it. And then when we moved to the rock barn, it was like we might get relocated because somebody had reserved it for a birthday party or something.
And have an auction.
Yeah. So
you guys don't remember this. The freshmen were not here. The freshmen were at the old Adams Middle School. And the wrestling room at the end of the cafeteria, that was all glass. And we had wrestling mats right up next to the glass. One time we had two wrestlers that hit the glass and busted it out. And luckily, to this day, somebody was looking after us. There was a big chunk of glass that fell out instead of in. Fell out in the ground. A big pointed piece of glass fell out in the ground rather than into the wrestling room at the time. And so, and then they built that wall there, which they're now in this classroom. But yeah, it was something that we did forever. Tables, chairs, and of course, I would say most of our wrestlers didn't like it. Some of them would disappear when it came time to roll the mats up. You had that problem sometimes. And so most of the time they just accepted it and they wrestled they wrestled as hard as they could. And, they had posts there too that weren't padded.
Yeah.
None of those were padded. It was a long time coming. I mean, I'm so proud of having that wrestling room for our wrestlers right now. I mean, that's just amazing to me. And they deserved every bit of it. The program has been successful. And
we're coming on 10 years of that room now, which sounds crazy, but a lot of kids, especially younger kids, don't know what it's like to not have the wrestling room. They've always had the wrestling room, and that's a good thing. But Some of us that have been around a while know what it was like to not have the wrestling room and what a difference that makes in your program.
What's funny about that is, trust me, the alumni tell them when they're at a duel and they're rolling up mats and maybe they're complaining or maybe it never fails. An alumni who has wrestled in the commons and had to roll you guys, you haven't seen anything. We used to do this every morning and night and we rolled it up. And so we haven't let them forget.
Those old mats, to be honest, when you said missile, I almost couldn't get out of my chair because they were so heavy and awkward. And now those mats are only about 6 or 7 feet and they're a lot lighter and a lot easier to move around. But those ones that were big were so hard to move around.
Yes. Well, it took 6 people, holding hands to cross. It took 6 people to move those, at least 6.
At least, yeah.
We talk community and family. Your family has to support you when you're a coach. You're away. I've seen your schedule, and it doesn't look like you're anywhere near Trenton most nights till pretty late at night. So talk about that, the moms, the whole atmosphere of that.
When we came, we had tremendous support from the Houck family. That comes to mind because they had 3 boys that wrestled. And one of them was one of my first state qualifiers and ended up being a wrestling coach. And he was just recently, Ethan Houck was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame last fall. He had a career coaching wrestling. So those families were wonderful, very supportive. And then the fact our wives, coach's wife, I mean, it's very important. And of course, I've had the best in the whole world. She gets upset and she gets into the wrestling as much as more than I do, to tell you the truth. And then Bill Hill, Babette was a tremendous supporter of Bill, and she was always there. And I think Charlie feels the same way. And I know a lot of coaches over the years, and you never saw their wife at a match. Or maybe she couldn't take it anymore and they weren't married anymore, because he was gone all the time and she didn't like that. And maybe they had kids at home. And, I had 2 girls and they came to the wrestling matches and they were little cheerleaders and they became big cheerleaders. My whole family is involved in the wrestling program at Trenton High School and has been since 1974. And we still are.
Yeah, same with me. I've been so fortunate starting with, all of the wrestlers' moms who help out with things. And I mean, you're just all the time they ask you, what do you need? And they still come, like we're hosting the GRC Wednesday and we're talking alumni wrestlers. Their moms are coming in and working tables and giving back to the program. And it's just, I don't think you would find that in too many other sports. It's just a sense of family. My wife has been, she's my rock during wrestling season. And I remember the first year, since she's not a teacher and she's a cosmetologist, she tried to make the first year we were married, she tried to make every single thing. She's like, I don't know if I can do this. My hours are just a little bit different. I said, honey, that's okay. You can miss a couple here and there. But it's funny. She'll say, well, I'll see you in February when wrestling starts.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And that's just a feature of it. It seems like when we talk about legacies, obviously it's not finances. Ron, you've gotten a lot of great awards over the years. The National Wrestling Hall of Fame, citations, in the Missouri Wrestling Hall of Fame, and in Misha with the Irving Keller Award just a couple years ago. But clearly that's not why you did it.
Well, no, I've always been dedicated to the Missouri Activity Association. I've done probably 20 district wrestling tournaments, probably 20 district golf tournaments, probably 20 state golf tournaments now. And this will be my 50th year of working at a state tournament since 1976, either as a coach or as a table worker, or right now I do the highlight matches that I've done for 13 years. Just something, I've got great friends there. They've been good to me. I've served on, like these guys, I've served on rules committees, Greg Stahl being involved in it. He called and said, could you help out? Sure. Great relationship with them. And then the awards were great, but you're exactly right. I wanted to be involved and I wanted to be involved in the Missouri Wrestling Coach Association. I was executive director of that for 8 or 9 years. And I don't understand, Charlie and I talked about this, coaches that don't join that organization or they don't go to their clinics or they don't go to their camps. And I go, it's your sport. I mean, how can you not join your coaches association and be involved in that? That's what you're here for.
I had a relative who talked about how the value of his retirement was in direct correlation to how much he loved the work that he did during his career and how he felt about what he accomplished during his career had a lot to do with how, when he flipped the switch to retirement, he felt like he had earned that right, and that love of whatever it was just shifted into other things. So I think it's fabulous that you're still connected to all that. And practically all of your awards are lifetime achievement awards. I mean, they're 20 plus years of commitment to that, to young people.
Right. Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to do it. Gone to the state tournament forever, and I assume I will until I assume they have a place for a guy in a wheelchair there.
No doubt they will.
Norm turned 90 the other day, and he still goes to games.
Hey, and shout out to the class of 66, 67, right? Because that was your class,
Yep.
And we circle back to the impact they had in football in this town, and because of you, the impact that class had on wrestling in this town. What was going on in 1966 and 1967? I mean, we heard from those football guys that we didn't know at the time that it was going to turn into this, but anything about that class stick out to you, that you guys were close, that you guys had good work ethic? What was going on there?
I think we were a very close class and still are, because we still have monthly meetings, and we had it was just a really good year, and all those years were great years to be in Trenton High School. I mean, we had good sport, good basketball, good football, good wrestling, good track. And then we had just good people. And our school was larger than, we were probably over 500 kids back in those days.
In 3 grades, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we had tremendous athletes. And John Hamilton, who's our quarterback and all-state quarterback, played at the University of Missouri, and then he won the state championship in the long jump. Back in they still call it the long jump, anyway. And it still holds the record. Still holds the record at Trenton High School long jump, and that's 50 years old. Of course, Richard Griffith and George Moore, and I don't know how many in our class went into teaching and coaching, but I'll bet probably 20 of our classmates ended up teaching or coaching. So that's because of the influence we had in high school. That's what we wanted to do.
Well, I think you guys are seeing that with kind of your coaching trees and the people you've inspired to move on and help out. And I think what's impressive about the program, me being lucky enough to be in the position that I'm in now, and I've been around Trenton High School and the activities for the last 20 years in some fashion or other, and you come across people who've been a part of this wrestling program, and whether it was they wrestled for Coach Hurst or Coach Hill or Coach Bacon, it's not just that they respect them as their coach, because there's a lot of people who I think have had respect for their coach, but maybe weren't connected to them as a person. They knew they were well coached, but there wasn't that connection there. I think that's what's special about this wrestling program that kind of separates it from when people talk about having Coach Hurst, it's that they loved Coach Hurst and that he loved them. And it was the same thing with Coach Hill, and it's the same thing with Coach Bacon. It's not that they're their coach. I mean, that these are the people that they're inviting. They get invitations to weddings, and Charlie will have a stack of graduation requests this high, and there's 80 kids graduating. They've built a program and have had so much success because these kids want to run through a wall for them, because it's not just that they are being coached and coached well, but that they feel cared for and looked after, and they're a part of this family. And there's been a lot of successful wrestlers who that was probably the best family they were ever a part of. And that says a lot about the 3 men who have carried this torch for the last 50 years as the 3 coaches, and kudos goes out to them because they've built something special. And it's just so great to see them interact with their former athletes. I've just had the opportunity to see it a lot, and kudos to you guys, because that says a lot about you as coaches and your character as men, to be honest.
Just a little sliver, because I've coached for 5 years in the middle school, and is there anything better than somebody yelling across the field at you, "Hey, coach"? I mean, there isn't much better than that in life, than people that respond to you in that way and to have that relationship. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about girls' involvement in wrestling.
Yep.
And the explosion of that, and give us a minute or two on that.
Well, right now, I mean, it's the fastest growing sport. I don't know what the exact numbers are in Missouri, but it's exploded, and it's been incorporated into, at first, girls could wrestle in your boys lineup, and now they've separated it, and you've got your girls teams and your boys teams, and I think it's great because, I mean, there are so many girls that were looking for a home. Maybe they didn't like basketball, or maybe they weren't, good at basketball. And so I think you're going to see that continue to grow. And I just saw that D1 and all of the colleges that have a boys wrestling program, now they're going to have a girls wrestling program too. So I'm assuming scholarships will come from that, and you're going to see a lot of competitiveness.
I'll add that Iowa started, how great Iowa is in boys wrestling or men's wrestling. They started a girls wrestling program last year. They were the first Division I school to start one. And a friend of mine and Charlie's, Gary Mayab, is assistant coach there. It's a growing sport. The Big Ten has said, we're having girls wrestling, because last year they had a girls national tournament. They had 40 schools. They were all in one division. So now they're trying to do Division I, and the Big Ten's a part of that. And so if the Big Ten starts back in it, wrestling in the Big Ten's as good as it gets. So it's going to grow, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
So we need some stories. Daniel, you want to kick us off into the story segment?
Yeah, so here's my question. I actually could have a bunch, but I'll try to be respectful here of some of those things. So from your guys' perspective, I want to know about, like, what's a match that you have probably thought about the most, whether it ended in your favor or against that story, that match that just really had your heart pumping. Because I know just me as a casual fan, there's matches that stick out in my mind as, man, that was incredible. Carson Hill, Chris Wilkes is still one of my favorite sports memories ever. And so as a coach, being down there with coaching these kids, what is a match specifically that you can think of right now that still sticks out to you? Again, whether ended in your kid's favor or not.
The positive one is Matt Briegel versus Wyatt Pickering. Wyatt Pickering was a wrestler from Chillicothe. He was ranked like 6th in the nation, and he was wrestling Matt Briegel in Trenton in a packed house versus Chillicothe, and he was very good on his feet, Wyatt Pickering was, and he was leading because he took him down and let him go, and he took him down and let him go. I think it was leading 14-3 or something like that, and he just sort of got into third period, and he just wore out, I thought, Wyatt did. And Briegel had a great cradle, and he started hooking up the cradle and turning him to his back, and he'd hook up the cradle and turn him to his back, and it's down to where it's like 14-13 or 14-12, and he's got to turn him one more time, and he turns him with like 10 seconds to go. He turns him and puts him on his back and beats him. And that's the loudest I've ever heard the Trenton High School gym. I mean, that was when you were allowed to stomp on the old wooden bleachers, and I mean, and I've even people come up to me to this day, and they still remind me of that. Remember that match with Briegel and that kid from Chillicothe? I mean, they still talk about that, of being in the gym and seeing that where he came back and beat him, and it was by far the greatest come from behind match and in a great situation. And then my saddest match was Brent Trickle, who was a defending state champion, and he's wrestling a kid, and he's up 14-3, and he shoots a takedown, and this kid grabs his shoulders and pulls him on top of him, and they call a body slam at the state tournament, and this kid refused to wrestle, and Trickle loses because he got disqualified. And I mean, it was devastating, absolutely devastating, because he was going to be my first 2-time state champion at the time, and he was by far the superior wrestler. And this was in the semifinals; it wasn't in the finals. And
so, after one body slam, you got DQ'd, or was it up to the other wrestler?
No, you body slam. If you get called for an illegal hold and that kid can no longer wrestle, you lose. You're disqualified. Whether it's a shoulder or whatever. If you did something illegal and hurt him, then and he can't wrestle, you lose automatic. So anyway, it was devastating, and then we've had people coming up to us afterwards and saying they knew that kid, they'd watched him all year. He'd done that 3 or 4 times during the season, and I watched the film over and over again, and he had a technique where if you shot on him, he would grab your shoulders and pull you down on top of him. And I sent the tape into Misha, and just because I said, you need to watch this move, because I couldn't do anything about it, of course, but I said, you need to watch this move. What if this kid teaches this move to other people when they're desperate and getting beat? And of course, never heard anything. But anyway, that was the most devastating loss for an individual. And of course, Brent was a great kid and ended up having a great career in the Navy and was a captain and and he is also inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame as a great American.
That's great.
That's as good as it gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Charlie, how about you?
A couple of positive ones, and then I've got one similar to Coach Hurst, but you mentioned the Chris Wilkes Carson Hill match. And I mean, it had been the match that everybody, I think, all eyes were on that year.
Was that a semifinal, though?
It was a semifinal
Yes.
match.
Right, okay.
The funny thing about that was, even Coach Hill, I was at practice and remember him saying, Carson, you could easily win it at 44 or whatever the weight class was then. And Carson's like, I wrestle best at this weight. And he said, well, you could see the Wilkes kid in the semifinals because that's just the way the state tournament works. It's a random draw. And Carson was not an arrogant kid by any means, but he was a realist and he had self-belief. And without batting an eye, Carson, he said, well, good, I guess my finals match will be easier then, won't it? Without a doubt. I mean, And I thought that was really cool. And then the outcome, it was an overtime match. I think they took us down right off the bat. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And then Carson figured it out and just real methodical and got that takedown in overtime. And I mean, the whole arena, I mean, like I said, all eyes were on that match. I think he was ranked #1 in the nation. There was a kid who'd wrestled nationally.
Was he a Whitfield kid?
He was a Whitfield kid, yeah. And so then Carson goes, and he was exactly right. Carson's finals match was nothing compared to a semifinals match. I mean, so that was really cool. My first year of head coaching, the state tournament was just like, it was amazing. I got 3 kids in the state finals, and I was riding on cloud 9. And Coach Hurst was there. I remember talking to him afterwards, but they all 3 lost. And it was Carlos Gonzalez and Mason Mounts and Jake Spillman. And of course, 2 were seniors, Carlos, and there were some controversial things that happened in that match, unfortunately. And I feel like really we had earned the win there and didn't come away with the state champion. So that was just talk about the emotional roller coaster ride of being on top and then 3 losses in the finals. And I was devastated for weeks, months afterwards.
Well, that Carlos match also, it was one of those where this kid took him down, I think, once, and then he stalled the entire match. And every time Carlos tried to shoot on him, he'd run to the edge of the mat, and they never called stalling. They never called. It was one of the worst refereed matches I can remember at the state tournament when it was obvious what was going on. And I mean, it was one of our crowd was into it, and it was one of those that was tough to take. So
the Spillman match was really close and came down to the right at the end too, didn't it?
1-0.
1-0.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. 1-0.
Remember that one too, and he was on the bottom the whole third period.
Yep, he was.
Daniel, what about you? I know you've seen as many as anybody. Let's turn the tables a little bit.
Well, for me, it's definitely, like I said, the Carson. Charlie and I were getting our masters together that year, and we were ready to get it done, and the closest place was Brookfield. So we talked a lot of wrestling, and that was kind of a theme. Like, for me, I kept thinking, I wish he would move. Like, I wish he would move down. Because in my mind, he was really good, but we had talked about this Wilkes kid since we saw him as a freshman coming up, and we're like, he's just unbelievable. And that match was being a fan of wrestling and watching ever since I've watched Charlie. But of all sports, that's a moment that sticks out to me as oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm seeing this happen. And in fact, I remember visiting with Coach Hurst right after, and I remember him saying this, as a guy who, I don't know anybody who knows more about wrestling. He said, shame on me for doubting that could even happen. And Carson, and after that, I was like, why would I ever wonder if this kid because even the match he lost his sophomore year it was the semifinals.
Yeah.
He was a crazy nosebleed away from winning that match too and being a 4-time state champion for us in my mind. So, but that match was so good and one of my favorites to watch. But there's just been so many over the years, even matches with Charlie. I remember one from his sectional finals match with a kid from Centralia. That was a great match. The kid was really good. And Charlie's big move was his, high C that he hit at the very end. Was that an overtime match?
Yeah, it shouldn't have been. But
that was an overtime match that gave Charlie a 1C going into his state finals year in an absolutely loaded bracket where if that bracket existed today, everybody who finished above Charlie is in class 2 or above. It was loaded and he had a lot of great matches to watch. So I could think of a ton. I've just become a huge fan of the sport.
Where are you at this one? I'm a little biased because of its family, but my nephew, Justin Brinzer, who was just a big, strong kid.
The king of the bridge.
And he got to the state tournament. And of course, you guys must have script writers at Misha that are behind the scenes writing the scripts for all these controversies. But he got into a controversy because the kid, I think it was from Lexington,
yes,
that beat him, ended up getting called out for something illegal and got disqualified. But they don't go backwards, if I remember this right.
Yeah.
I'm a basketball guy talking wrestling here, but they don't go backwards in the tournament. They just say, okay, from here on out, we move forward.
Yeah.
He lost to the kid right before he got disqualified from the tournament for something illegal that he did. but I believe Justin went on and did okay to finish out
Yeah.
the tournament. But that was fun as an uncle watching him and having a little bit of a connection there on that, because he was I think he was one of those kids, like you said, just got better and better and figured it out as he went.
He did. Justin, I was going to bring him up earlier because he is a kid. He started as a sophomore, and I remember just raw, just no technique, no nothing. It looked like, an old Western where they fall out of a saloon and they're just rolling in the streets.
A John Wayne movie or something.
It looked like a John Wayne movie. And Justin, finally, he dialed it in and got some technique. And yeah, I remember, and in fact, we gave that kid a good match, and he was the favorite to win it.
Right.
Then what I think had happened was the kid who he would have faced in the finals, the Lexington kid who he would have had in the finals, their team called him out and found some legal issues that he'd gotten in trouble and maybe shouldn't be eligible to even be wrestling. And then, at that time it was, we're not going to advance Justin because he was the last guy that got beat by him. But Justin ended up coming back and getting a 4th place medal with only 3 years total wrestling experience. So he was a special kid for sure.
Talk about any good travel stories or just the things that happen around the matches. Silly, memorable.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean,
getting into the weeds here a little bit, maybe.
My first year of head coaching, we were going to the Maryville tournament, and I made the mistake of taking a nap on the bus, and it was, 5 a.m. And I remember one of the kids woke me up, said, "Coach, I don't know where we're at. I don't think this doesn't seem right." And he said, "I'm seeing windmills all around me." And we were up by King City somehow. We forgot to turn by Stanberry. And so I've got my phone on me and I start calling, and I'm like, "Hey, we're going to be late for weigh-ins." And this was a tournament you didn't want to be late for because Joe Drake, who'd been there for coaching forever, I walk into the seating meeting, and of course we're 15 minutes late, and it was my first year, and all the coaches, this is what happens when Bacon takes over. We're just going to make a habit of this. And
the era has officially ended in Trenton.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we've got busing well under control now.
Sure, we don't have any busing stories since then.
We have no busing issues now.
Zero.
Right.
My second year here, we go to Iowa to Centerville, I think, to a wrestling tournament, and it starts snowing. And it was Kirksville and us, and the rest were Iowa schools. So it was one of those tournaments. Kirksville and us, we always battled out between 7th and 8th place, in those days, because and it starts snowing, and it snows the whole day. And I had 2 wrestlers, Ethan Houck and Jeff Brown, that their girlfriends decided to drive up to the tournament in a 65 Mustang. They get up there, and they're scared to death to go home. So here I am. I can't put them on the bus and leave the car. I can't do anything. So I tell Ethan and Jeff, I said, "Okay, you get in the car, you get behind the school bus, and you follow us all the way to Trenton." So they said, "Okay, you promise you're doing this." "Okay, we're doing this." So they're behind the bus. I'm a nervous wreck, obviously, checking. We get to Princeton, and we're going up the hill in the school bus, and we get over the hill. I look around, and there's no car. And I'm going, "Oh, my gosh." And, of course, we didn't have cell phones in those days. So I'm a nervous wreck, second-year coach, lost 2 wrestlers and two girls, so so I get home, and, of course, I got to call the parents, and one of the parents answers the phone, and I tell them what happened. It's, "Oh, no problem. Don't worry about it." I said, "What?" "They couldn't get up that hill in Princeton, and my Aunt Betty lives there, so they went to Aunt Betty's house, and they're going to spend the night, and everything's okay. Don't worry about it." They were totally understanding, totally fine. All the parents were fine with it. I said, and I always think back, I said, what if that would have happened today, under the circumstances?
Oh,
okay. I've got one.
That almost gives me as much heart palpitations as the glass story you told earlier.
Well, here's a good one too. And we haven't talked about the legacy of Ron as an athletic director. And so here's one for you on this one. So I am I believe, second year JV girls basketball coach in Trenton. So this is when Ron's AD, and we're going back over 25 years ago. And we go to Kirksville like on a Tuesday night. And when we get over there, we play the game and it starts icing outside. And so our bus driver, who's 118 years old, we think at the time,
Give or take,
goes out to start the bus and slips and falls, hurts himself. And he comes back into the gym and he looks at Coach Adwell and myself and says, "I'm not driving you home in this." And we say what? And he says, "Well, I'm not doing it. I'm not driving home." And I said, okay, what are we supposed to do? He goes, "I don't know, but I'm just telling you right now, I'm not driving home." So I look at Coach Adwell, I don't know what to do. Let's call Ron. So somehow we find, I don't even know if it was cell phone or we called your home phone, but I get a hold of Ron. I said, "Here's what's happening. Our bus driver will not drive us home." Ron says, "Okay, could you stay the night?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Can you put it on a credit card?" And I said, "No, I don't have a credit card. I think that'll hold all that money." Ron gives me his, I don't know if you even remember this, gives me his personal credit card over the phone. And we go to the Budget Host Inn. Coach Adwell and I across the street go to the Budget Host Inn with 15 or 16 freshmen and sophomores and stay. It gets better, and stay the night. And we have to stay with the bus driver who stays in our room. So John and I and the bus driver are staying in a room, and we get all the kids in rooms. None of the kids have any money. So I go out in the morning to the ATM, a bank that's close by, and we get out money, and we get breakfast for the kids, and we're trying to get back, and our bus driver comes back in again and says, "The bus has no heat." What? So now I can't get the heat to work, so we're going to have to drive home this morning in the cold. So it is freezing cold. We get all the kids on, and we get to school, and Ron meets us when we pull up, and I said, "Oh man, these kids, do they have to come to school today?" And Ron says, "Yes, they do. Give them 45 minutes to get home, take a shower, and come back and get to school." So by 9 o'clock, we got back into town. By 10 o'clock, all our kids were back in school. And I hope, Ron, that you got reimbursed for that hotel at the Budget Host, because I never know if you did or not.
I have a feeling I'm going to get a credit card bill.
Here comes the requisition
from Ron Hurst on Monday that for reimbursed from that.
Yeah.
Those budget hosts.
Budget hosts.
That's quality stuff.
It's because mainly it was across the street there next to the Domino's Pizza at...
Charlie, do you see now why I sometimes will now just cancel going to wrestling tournaments? Because that's what I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please avoid that.
I'm trying to avoid the athletic director having to put, 14 rooms and breakfast and a bus heater on their
No, I got breakfast. I was at an ATM. I probably walked half a mile down whatever that main road is.
The 23-year-old coach who has no money.
And I'm wondering, do I have $40 I can pull out of my ATM to feed these kids before
we're all sharing a donut
before we get back on the road on a bus that has no heat, so my AD can tell me to come back to school that morning?
Thank goodness we love sports.
Hey,
I mean,
yes,
we put up with all this
and
stuff.
I'll never forget that. So your legacy as wrestling goes on, but don't forget that. How long were you AD? You were AD
8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, let's wind up. You can take this either of two ways. You can talk about a young person that is considering the opportunities that the sport of wrestling offers them, or you can talk about what it's done for you. Whichever way you want to take this. I mean, the thread of sport running through people's lives changes lives. And you've done this as coaches, and it happened to you as participants in sports as young men, led to things you couldn't have imagined. So take it any way you want. What would you tell a young person and your life as an example, perhaps, for them to follow?
Well, I think the number one thing was just I've been blessed with a great career in this town of Trenton and in the school system. I couldn't have had any better support. And then even when I moved to have young coaches that did their job, and I was very proud of them and great to work with them because the torch was passed and they did a great job, as Charlie does and Bill did. I couldn't be happier in that area. and Mr. Ockenfeld here also, and just all the new coaches that came in after I got out. We had a great group of young coaches that came in, and some of them still stuck around and did a great job. But just the fact that you've already mentioned how the wrestling family, and to this day, and I have to mention my mother who passed away on the 22nd of December, and just the love and the appreciation of her being a wrestling fan and her going to the state wrestling tournament, stories of that. And her being there, as the grandma, and then Coach Marcia, and it's just been an unbelievable ride. I could recommend that to any young person going into coaching, even though I know things have changed and teaching has changed a lot from when I started. And you guys, there's no doubt it's a lot tougher today because when I did it, you had the support of the community, you had the support of the school board, you had the support of the administration. It was just a wonderful career to go into at the time, as well as I know, things have changed from that. And I still think the rewards outweigh the negative tenfold. And once you get into it, and, I'm glad to see some of our young people that have got into it, like Trey Shields and what he's done, and he's moving on. I just love to see them getting involved and staying involved. And I'm really happy that looking at two people right here from Trenton, Missouri, that grew up in Trenton, Missouri, that are still in Trenton, Missouri. That's what I think we're missing is kids get up, grow up, they go away, and they don't come back. I think we've done a great job in Trenton to hire people back that came through the school system, and they've done a great job because they didn't used to do that sort of thing. Now they do, and I think it's wonderful that you guys have your families here, and Chris has stayed here. We came in and he stayed here and still living here. I think that's wonderful for our whole community. And that's what education and a career coaching can cause.
It's all because you gave me that phone call and said, Chris, this is Ron Hurst. Would you like to coach girls JV basketball? And I said, say that again? He said, well, that's one of the coaching spots we have for you. This is in 1996, I think. And I said, well, I've always thought of myself as a boys basketball coach, but if that's what you got, I'll take it. And then the rest is history from there. So, yeah, those little decisions you make as a teacher, as an AD, as a coach, have big ramifications later for generations of people, and it makes it well worth it to stay in a community for a long time.
I'm a North Missouri kid from Lawson, but I didn't move here till I was almost 40 years old. And I started playing Sunday night basketball with some guys and met some people. And then I convinced somebody to marry me and move up here. And my wife, Donlin, taught for 16 years in the school district. And now I have the pleasure of working in the school district with a little bit of basketball. And then I watched my daughter come through the system and then be a volunteer coach this year. And we walk around talking like a couple old coaches sometimes, And it's nice to find a place that felt like home. Charlie, same question to you.
Well, I'll kind of answer both. The coaching side of it, for me, I mean, the state medals are great. The state championships are great. But for me, it's being in a best man in a wedding for one of my ex-wrestlers and going and just watching them grow up, and what the sport's done for them. I've got wrestlers who are pilots now, welders, you name it, all over. But seeing them be a dad and be a good husband. And I think wrestling is just a sport that really, there's just no better sport to build those skills and prepare you for all of the things that you're going to face in life. Because like I said, in the world of instant gratification, wrestling is not a sport where you're going to get instant gratification. And you've got to learn that delayed success through work. And I think that's really important for young people, especially to go through. You've got to earn that, all of the aches and pains before that big win. And I think that's huge. But that's what I think wrestling offers young kids. And I've got like Mason Owen is coaching now in Lathrop, and it's just fun to see that tradition carry on and be involved in, I'll still get text and calls from my ex-wrestlers all the time. And I think that's really cool.
And I can add to that too, because of, Charlie, one of my ex-wrestlers, but I had Dan Duncan, John Daniels, Reggie Burris, Ethan Houck, all those guys went into coaching. And I tell people, I said, I never won a state championship. I got second twice. But my ex-wrestlers have won 10 state championships. So that's just as rewarding to me.
Absolutely.
The coaching tree continues.
That's a great story. Okay, we're going to kind of wind this down, and I'll let you guys jump in with any final thoughts before we close this episode out. Maybe it's 2 episodes. I think it is 2 episodes.
Well,
Quite likely.
I think we've got enough content for 3, but we could probably cut it to 2. But I've just a final thought for me. I've just enjoyed the stories like I do with all of our guests, and hearing and having fun and laughing and listening to the impact that these 2 gentlemen have had on our kids and our community is really gratifying. And I could, listen to 100 more, and I know we have to stop, but that's the fun part for me. And I think why you do this podcast and why I latched on so many weeks ago is because it's important. It's important that people hear these stories. It's important that people listen to what people like this have to say, because they're having an impact on the people of our community.
Yeah, for me, as the least athletic person in this room, like still even actively today, but I do love sports. And sports has been a huge part of my life in one way or the other, just following it and being a fan, and a little bit that I did play. This episode was important for me, and I wanted to be a part of a lot because Charlie and I have been a part of each other's life in a lot of these bigger moments and done a lot of things together. And watching him go through his career as a wrestler and as a coach has been great. I feel like he's always allowed me just to kind of come along for the ride and talk about it with him, and just really proud of what he's accomplished. And then just what an honor it is to, be a part of the school district, how I have, and just seeing the legacy that Coach Hurst has left behind, and how he's been an inspiration to a lot of people, and not just coaching wrestling, but coaching many sports. And he's still a big member of this community, and you still see him about, and you still see him at events, and Mrs. Hurst still is involved in the schools as well. There's a reason wrestling is such a great program. I basically just want to be part of this to say thank you guys for keeping this rolling, and what you've done will go on forever. You guys will be remembered for years and years and years to come for building this program and keeping it going, because there's not a single program that can say they've had 3 head coaches in a 50-year span. That is impressive. Yes. And that says a lot about a program, not just for Trenton, Missouri, but for any program. So great job, gentlemen, and thank you for doing it and letting us all be part of the ride.
Thank both of you for coming in. When I look back and I think back to 74 when you started coaching, I was trying to get a date to homecoming. So it spans my whole life, and 3 coaches during that time. It's just amazing. It's been so much fun listening to you talk. Love seeing Ron and Marcia anywhere I see them in the community. It's a better day for having seen them. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank all of you that listen to Show Me Sports Legacy.